The Telesur headquarters in Caracas, Venezuela. Welcome back to From the South. I am Luis de Jesus. Let's take a look at our headlines. Police violence against Mapuche community continues in Chile. The indigenous community claims the liberation of their political leaders. Hurricane Isaias struck the coastal zone of South and North Carolina in the United States. And former Spanish King Juan Carlos de Borbón leaves the country following the investigations against him for alleged corruption cases. And now we begin with the news. Stay with us. We start right away. Police violence against the Mapuche community continued in Chile this Monday. Several claims through social media address a group of officials who repressed with tear gas and water cannons the demonstrations of the Mapuche community in Collipuli. Also in the locality of Molco in Araucaria region, some demonstrators of the Mapuche community has reported to have been repressed with violence by special forces of the police who had entered by force, shooting no little weapons again and gas bombs.
The reason, above all, is linked to the hunger strike that Mapuche political prisoners are undertaking, and in addition to what happened last Saturday in Curacautín. There is real sadness, bitterness and anger over what happened there. The government and the state must assume responsibility for what is going on. They are turning us against each other, Mapuche against Mapuche. The state has to respond to the demands of the Mapuche people.
And meanwhile, the Chilean prosecutor's office in the Araucanía region opened a criminal investigation against armed civilians who attacked Mapuche community members during the violent evictions in the municipality of Curacautín past Saturday. Various social movements condemned the acts of violence by the state and racism in several communities of Araucanía that seeks to evict the Mapuche community members from their ancestral territory. Mapuche leaders pointed out that the government of Sebastián Piñera is trying to create conditions for a confrontation between peoples, stressing that they will continue to demand the release of Mapuche political prisoners despite the aggression of the police forces. And as the protests continue in Chile against attacks on Mapuche communities by right-wing groups, as well as heavy repression by state security forces, our correspondent Alejandro Kirk brings us more details.
Yes, the events of Saturday night have triggered a lot of reactions in the country. Demonstrations by Mapuche communities in several towns of the Wallmapu, the Mapuche country, Concepción, Valdivia, Temuco, Traiguén and Cochipulli, where a truck was burned this morning. All of them met with heavy repression, as it is usual in Chile, by the militarized police. The human rights commissions of both chambers of parliament have announced a joint investigation on the role of the new Interior Minister, Víctor Pérez, who was in the region when these events took place, in what happened. And what happened was that right-wing mobs organized by paramilitary groups allegedly attacked several town halls simultaneously, which had been seized by Mapuche activists. The role of racism in Chilean society has been largely ignored, and it's part of the constitutional debate that is taking place in the country now.
Thank you to Alejandro Kirk. And that report in Bolivia, mobilizations began following a call by the Bolivian Workers' Center, the chief trade union federation of the country, to demand that the date set by law for general elections on September 6 be respected. Our correspondent Freddy Morales brings us more details.
Roadblocks began in some regions in the early hours of Monday morning in support of the demand that September 6 be maintained as the date for the national elections.
For 3 days, we're going to mobilize. This is indefinite. For 3 days, we will be here. Not on the car is going to pass. Neither our cars are soybeans going to leave. On the fourth day, we are going to give permissions for soybeans.
On the highway from Oruro to Potosí, the police dispersed the roadblock with chemical agents. In other cities, there were street demonstrations in Cochabamba. The city's 9th district warned of joining the protests. The Electoral Court is ordered to hold the national elections on September 6, 2020, as determined by Law 1304. In this way, District Number 9 categorically rejects any act of postponement and demands the holding of national elections on September 6, 2020.
No podemos calcular. Ya sigue más de 4 kilómetros esta gran marcha nacional.
The largest demonstrations took place in the coca-growing region of El Chapare, in the department of Cochabamba, where roadblocks were also set up on the highway between that department and Santa Cruz. In order not to face greater problems, the electoral body and this de facto government that only came in to hold elections must provide certainty to the Bolivian people, tell the Bolivian people the truth, whether there will be elections or not in our plurinational state of Bolivia. In El Alto City, the 8th district joined in blocking the streets and avenues, and a group of people railed in front of the Electoral Tribunal to demand what has come to be called respect for democracy. This is the demand for the elections to be held on September 6 instead of October 18, which is the fourth date set by the Electoral Court, under pressure from right-wing sectors that cannot overcome their lack of support, according to polls of voting intention. The movement towards socialism remains the favorite.
Freddy Morales, Telesur, Bolivia.
And in another subject, speaking at a video conference with his cabinet, President of Venezuela Nicolás Maduro assured that the National Assembly will be recovered from the right wing in the December 6th parliamentary elections with the support of the Venezuelan people.
We are going to recover the National Assembly with the people. It is the people who have the task. I hand this responsibility to the people. It's the Venezuelan people who have the task of recovering the National Assembly and putting it at the service of the people themselves, of peace, of national unity, sovereignty, national stability, welfare, happiness, economic recovery.
In more from Venezuela, Minister for Communication Jorge Rodríguez announced on Monday the detection of 548 new COVID-19 cases in the country.
As of this Monday, August 3, 2020, we have to report 477 new cases of community transmission and 71 cases imported by nationals who have entered the border with Colombia, with Brazil, and other countries, especially from South America.
Cuba and the United Kingdom announced the creation of the joint venture Biopharma Innovations with the objective of bringing Cuban pharmaceutical products to Europe. The business strategy will focus on the development and accessibility of patented medicines in Europe through the British Commonwealth. The association also seeks to strengthen the Cuban biopharmaceutical industry in the region with a portfolio of certified products. The business proposal will expand its distribution networks and access of these pharmaceutical products to a greater number of people in the world as part of Cuba's international cooperation to combat the current pandemic. And Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro's chief of staff has tested positive for COVID-19 as the total number of coronavirus cases confirmed in the country surpassed 2.7 million this Monday. Army General Walter Sousa Braga Neto is the seventh Brazilian minister to have contracted the virus, but is reported to be asymptomatic. According to a statement, the official will remain in isolation until a further examination and medical evaluation is carried out, but will continue to work remotely. Brazil's health crisis shows no signs of slowing as the nation continues to be the second hardest hit in the world after the United States. The official COVID-19 death toll has now surpassed 94,000 according to the Health Ministry data. In the Caribbean, the Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association has called for the immediate closure of all primary schools. The call was issued following the increase in COVID-19 cases in people who have not had any history of recent travel. Several students have been infected in at least 4 schools. In a statement, the union's president stressed that the continued increase in COVID-19 cases across the country is viewed with great concern. The situation has significantly impacted students who are preparing for the secondary school entrance exam. And now we'll go to a short break. Follow us in Twitter at Telesur English and Luis Telesur. We'll be right back. The U.S. National Hurricane Center has issued a hurricane warning for South Carolina and North Carolina states as Isaias is forecast to strike land as a minimal hurricane in the next hours. Coastal residents brace for possible storm surge and flooding rains. A tropical storm warning was extended northward up the U.S. East Coast all the way to mouth of the Merrimack River in New Hampshire. Isaias was upgraded again to hurricane this Monday as it is threatened on its way to the United States.
I do everything to be safe. We've already battened down all the chairs and tables, brought everything inside, and the kids will be inside, and we've got plenty of food, so we won't starve.
Pretty scared to start off with, but then we thought, maybe it's not going to be that bad, so we decided to come on anyway.
Also in the U.S., Chicago Teachers Union members rallied and made their voices and horns heard Monday. As of now, Chicago public schools will be opening for modified in-person learning next month. But the city's teachers union wants that plan scrapped for an all-remote model. Teachers will join activists from New York to Los Angeles Monday to demand adequate classroom safety measures as schools all over the country debate to reopen. City teachers argue conditions aren't safe enough for in-person learning amid a steady uptick of COVID-19 cases. Parents have until Friday to decide if they're opting into the proposed hybrid CPS reopening plan.
We are not ready, this city is not ready to have students in the building.
It is not appropriate to open in-person learning in an environment with rising contagion, where positivity rates are over 8% in more than a dozen neighborhoods across the city. And those are the neighborhoods in Black and Latinx communities where our students live and go to school. You cannot go to the beach in the city of Chicago. You cannot drink indoors in the city of Chicago. But they're going to send hundreds of thousands of students into school buildings, hundreds to a building. Adults, people with immune compromise, people who have fragile health situations, to go to school in those buildings, and we're not going to stand for it. There has got to be leadership in the city.
And the United States leading expert on infectious diseases, Dr. Anthony Fauci, has said schools can be reopened as long as the risk presented by the novel coronavirus is very low. Speaking in an afternoon press briefing on Monday with the governor of the state of Connecticut, Fauci said the default approach should be to open schools for in-person for the sake of children's social and mental health, as well as access to nutrition, but stressed that safety came first. Connecticut has a comparatively low number of coronavirus cases as compared to other states.
My approach is always, and I'll say it whether I'm in Connecticut or in any other place, is that the default position should be to try as best as you possibly can to open up the schools for in-person learning for the following reason. It's important for the children because of the psychological benefit, and in some places, even for the nutrition of children who rely on the breakfast and the lunches in school for proper nutrition. Number two, there are important negative downstream effects that are unintended but can occur of a ripple effect on the parents who have to dramatically modify their own work schedule when you keep children at home. Having said that, there's a big however there, and the however is the primary consideration should always be the safety, the health, and the welfare of the children, as well as the teachers, and the secondary effects for spreading with regard to the parents and other family members. If the infection rate is so low that there's very little chance of there being infection spread, then you should feel okay about doing it, but making sure that you do the things that are necessary to prevent spread. It's always up to the final decision of the responsible parent to do what's best for the child. We can only show you that when the infection is low at the level you're seeing now, the risk is low. But if you do start to see infections, you may need to pull back.
And Chinese authorities have called on the United States to stop politicizing economic and trade issues after U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo recently announced that measures would be taken against Chinese apps like TikTok due to supposed national security concerns.
The U.S. is using an abused concept of national security and, without providing any evidence, is making presumptions of guilt and issuing threats to relevant companies. This goes against the principle of market economy and exposes the hypocrisy and typical double standards of the U.S. in upholding so-called fairness and freedom. It also violates the WTO's principle of openness, transparency, and non-discrimination. China is firmly opposed to this.
And also, China suspended Hong Kong's extradition treaty with New Zealand after its government joined other Western powers in suspending the extradition treaty with Hong Kong, citing concerns over the new national security law.
New Zealand, on the pretext of China's passage of the law on safeguarding national security in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, has recently unilaterally suspended its agreements with Hong Kong on fugitive transfer. New Zealand's relevant practices politicize Hong Kong's judicial cooperation, grossly interfere in China's internal affairs, seriously violate international law and the basic norms of international relations, as well as seriously damaging the foundation for the Hong Kong Special Administrative Regions to carry out judicial cooperation, and deviates from the purpose of safeguarding justice and the rule of law via judicial cooperation. Therefore, China has decided to suspend the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region's fugitive transfer agreements and agreements on mutual legal assistance in criminal matters with New Zealand. China is firmly opposed to the New Zealand's wrong move.
And U.S. President Donald Trump has given Microsoft the go-ahead to try and buy the popular Chinese app TikTok after he had threatened to ban it from the United States entirely. Trump announced that he suggested to Microsoft chief executive that he attempt to buy the app, as he wouldn't mind if Microsoft or any other very American company bought it. Used by as many as 1 billion people worldwide to produce 60-second videos on their cell phones, TikTok has become the latest focus of the ongoing political and trade battles between Washington and Beijing. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo recently announced that measures will be taken against Chinese apps like TikTok due to supposed national security concerns.
It's probably easier to buy the whole thing than to buy 30% of it, because they say, how do you do 30%? Who's going to get the name? The name is hot. The brand is hot. And who's going to get the name? How do you do that if it's owned by two different companies? So my personal opinion was, you're probably better off buying the whole thing rather than buying 30% of it. I think buying 30% is complicated. And I suggested that he can go ahead, he can try. And today I'm signing an executive order to ensure that the federal government lives by a very simple rule: hire American. We've been doing it at a level that hasn't been done maybe ever.
Vietnamese authorities have placed a second city into lockdown after 3 new COVID-19 cases were confirmed on Sunday.
It is very unfortunate that there have been people dying of COVID-19 in Vietnam, but there are people who have been suffering severe illness for a long time, and the virus was the fuel to further deteriorate their health condition. As for me, I would always wear a mask to protect myself. For those who have been in areas with outbreak, they must go to test for the virus. I'm worried that COVID-19 outbreak has returned to the country. I have always been reminding myself to wear a mask, wash my hands frequently, and avoid crowded places.
Russian Industry and Trade Minister Denis Manturov announced that the country will produce hundreds of thousands of monthly doses of its COVID-19 vaccine this year and more than 1 million in 2021. The minister noted that the amount will initially depend on the demand of the national health system, but starting next year, several million monthly doses could be manufactured. In this context, the Russian Direct Investment Fund announced that Russia will supply a drug developed to treat COVID-19 patients to Argentina, Bolivia, Ecuador, Uruguay, Paraguay, Honduras, and El Salvador. German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier has reacted to the surge in COVID-19 cases in the country with a virtual message in which he reminded Germans of the importance of following health and safety guidelines to fight the virus.
Aber der Zwischenerfolg darf uns nicht leichtsinnig machen.
Our original success must not make us reckless. The summer mood is good for us all, but it must not lead us to become careless in our fight against the pandemic. For we can see these days how uncertain and shaky the situation still is. No, the pandemic is not over. It is not gone. We are in the middle of it. The number of infections in Germany has risen again. The irresponsibility of a few puts us all at risk. If we are not particularly careful now, we will endanger the health of many, and we are also endangering the recovery of our society, our economy, and our cultural life.
And a group of 200 migrants on 8 barges arrived overnight in the Italian island of Lampedusa. The island has now seen the arrival of over 5,500 migrants in the past 2 weeks, according to Mayor of Lampedusa, Salvatore Martello. The official told local media that 250 boats have landed on the island and a few miles off the coast of Libya and Tunisia. Many of the migrants that arrived in recent days have been transferred to other parts of Italy. However, there are currently about 900 being held in the island's reception center, which only has capacity for 800. Second short break and more news coming up next. Stay with us. The King of Spain, Juan Carlos I, announced today he was leaving the country after the repercussions followed by investigations due to alleged cases of corruption against him. More details with our colleague Sergio Rodrigo.
Greetings. Juan Carlos de Borbón is self-exiled from Spain, and he has said in a communique addressed to Felipe VI, current King of Spain, son of Juan Carlos I, who left the country and insists that he does so to guarantee the tranquility and the calm of the Spanish monarchy, and also to allow his son to reign with stability. The latest information, also transmitted by Spain's public television, indicates that Juan Carlos de Borbón has already left the country, and the destination is yet to be known. The investigations that addresses him on different illicit financing in cases on his private life would certainly be related to this departure, as stated by the former king. The government of Spain has indicated that it was expected, and so far there has been no official communication. It is also expected that the different parties speak out. Some of them have made through social networks such as Twitter, as a coalition of group of the Spanish government of Unidos Podemos, which has pointed out its discomfort in this phase of this voluntary exile of the monarch Juan Carlos, who will continue to be investigated by the Spanish courts for alleged illegal financing on Spanish territory.
There was Sergio Rodrigo with the report. According to Palestinian agencies, Israeli fighter jets bombed Hamas facilities in the center and south of the besieged Gaza Strip early Monday morning. Local media added that the occupying Israeli regime fired 3 missiles at a building of the resistance forces in the west of Rafah city. The Israeli army claimed that the bombing of Gaza was in response to rocket attacks made by resistance groups. Hamas spokesperson Fawzi Barhoum denounced that the Israeli attacks are aimed at diverting attention from the deteriorating political and economic situation in the occupied Palestinian territories and mark an escalation of the violence. And Syrian authorities describe an agreement reached between Kurdish militias and an oil company based in the United States as illegal and invalid, noting that the move aims at stealing Syria's oil resources. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs pointed out that the agreements constitute an attack on Syria's sovereignty and a continuation of the hostile policy of the United States. Meanwhile, Turkish authorities have also condemned the deal, which was signed between the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces and the Delta Crescent Energy Corporation. United States Senator Lindsey Graham announced late in June that the deal sought to modernize oil fields in northeast Syria. United Nations officials warned on Monday of a possible humanitarian disaster in Libya, given the coronavirus pandemic and the possibility of military operations in the city of Sirte.
The UN remains concerned about a possible humanitarian disaster in Libya should the current escalation and mobilization around Sirte lead to military operations. The lives of more than 125,000 people in and around Sirte are at great risk. COVID-19 cases continue to increase across Libya, with 3,837 cases reported and 83 deaths to date, most of them in the western and southern parts of the country. Capacity for testing, tracing, and treating people remains extremely low across the country and continues to be concentrated in Tripoli and Benghazi.
And the Tehran Stock Exchange may have acted as a buffer to prevent one of the worst disasters for the Iranian economy, an analyst reported on Monday. On Sunday, the stock exchange crossed 2 million points for the first time, even as U.S. sanctions, unemployment, inflation, and low oil prices batter the Iranian economy. The Tehran Stock Exchange has seen sharp increases this year, despite the country struggling with one of the first serious coronavirus outbreaks outside of China. Lebanese Foreign Minister Nassif Hidi submitted his resignation to the Prime Minister this Monday. According to a government source, Prime Minister Hassan Diab and President Michel Aoun held consultations regarding the resignation to consider the following moves. According to local media, Lebanon is witnessing the worst economic crisis in its history, coinciding with the plunge of local currency to more than half of its value, with the high rate of inflation pushing nearly half of the population below the poverty line. And on August 3, 1960, the Republic of Niger gained its independence from France, the same year declared by UNESCO as the Year of Africa, giving the independence of 17 African nations that highlighted the growing